Hi, Niels. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you, Christine. How are you?
I'm good. You look pretty radiant. Just a real quick introduction. We may make this a bit of a series. Niels Kunze, who is a blogger, writer, musician, um, experimenter with life. I like that about you. It's experiential life that you've chosen for yourself. And you don't leave out your intellect and you don't leave out any of your parts. So this is a little series about Niels' journey through his accumulated knowledge of reestablishing the human body temple health in a natural way. Okay, because I'm just going to give my little piece here because I've been having lots of conversations. It's the pharmaceutical industry, the vaccine industry. We've been set up in a world that tells us our body needs help and that our body is somehow faulty and that our body is our enemy a lot of the times. And, this has been so predominantly put into our psyches that we manifest that quite often. So what you're finding, Niels, is that our body is our communion center or our communication center, and it's a marvelous mystery. And it's not something that needs to be hammered, chiseled, and coerced into health. It is naturally created for health. And so you're finding different things that have helped you and have changed your health based on giving the body the natural signaling ability that many of us have lost, or as we age. It's part of the aging process. These are the systems that start to slow down, shut down. So I'll hand it over to you. I know you were just telling me you've had some pretty extraordinary experiences lately.
Yeah, I mean, as we do age, our bodies become less efficient, and I think a main part of that inefficiency is the breakdown in communication. Our cells don't communicate with each other nearly as well. Even within the cell, our mitochondria don't communicate with the cell that they're contained within as well as they used to. We don't communicate as well with all of the other microbes that participate in the metabolism that is us. And over time, this is just all going to manifest as various disease states, or even if they don't make it to full-blown diagnosable disease. My experience was I was piling up all these little complaints, an ache and a pain here, a click in that joint. I guess psoriasis is a full-blown disease, so that was one of the recent ones that I did deal with for the last year or so. I had psoriasis for the first time in my life, and it was rather frustrating. But I can now report that psoriasis is conquered. It's gone, which I'm thrilled about and kind of surprised about. Sugar. My sugar addiction, I will happily report and confidently report, is over. I am no longer addicted to sugar. I don't need it at all in my life. And just the last couple weeks, don't touch it, don't need it, don't crave it, have no desire for it. Alcohol's out of my life. I'll share this one, even though it might not be the best, smartest thing to do, but I was basically a pothead for the last 25 years of my life, essentially getting high every day, and that is now ended as well as of the last 3 weeks to maybe a month. I'm no longer smoking pot, and everything's better. I mean, everything in my life has changed. And, all I'm talking about are the things that I gave up, all these habits, but everything's better. I think clearer. I definitely have more energy. And on a metaphysical level, I feel for the first time that I really do have free will. I'm not being pushed around internally by cravings that I don't know where they're coming from. I don't have those cravings. I get to choose what I'm going to do with my time. It's not just, well, these are the habits I've fallen into, so I'm just going to follow these habits blindly, which has kind of been most of my adult life. And it was based on my early adult life, which was all about partying. I was a heavy drinker into alcohol. Well, that's another thing that I've completely given up now too. I also don't drink anymore. So, I mean, I was into alcohol, and then I replaced it with marijuana, and I kind of, every evening when we got together with friends to socialize, which for a number of years, especially when I was in the band, that was quite often. We had dinner parties, and that was always just eating and drinking all through the night. You go to bed with a full belly, and you're drunk and you're high, and that was just my lifestyle for so many years. And so I would be a really good person in the mornings. When I wake up in the morning, I'm really good, clean, do everything right. And then sometime in the evening, I would switch into bad Niels and do essentially everything that we would now consider wrong. And in the evenings, I felt that I didn't have a will. I didn't exercise free will at any point. I was just being carried along by habits and events that I just got used to. This is what evening life is about. You just go along. And so what changed this for me, I'm getting a little dry mouth. What changed this for me was the two redox signaling products that I've written about so far, being Restore and ASEA. And it's been about 3 months of continuous use with these tools. And it just changed everything. My body, I could tell that internally, my own cells were now communicating with each other. The mitochondria within the cells were communicating with their own cells. Everything, all those cells were communicating with all the other microbe players that are playing in this human metabolism. Everything was suddenly talking to each other, and all of these cravings and habits fell away. I didn't make any intellectual conscious decision that, oh, I need to change my life. That never occurred during the process in these last 3 months at all. It was just my behavior started slowly changing just by little tiny steps, bit by bit, until I was like, oh, I'm not drinking beer anymore. Oh, I didn't buy any scotch. Oh, I'm not smoking pot anymore. Oh, now I'm even reevaluating my coffee addiction, which is shocking to me because I've always just absolutely loved coffee. And I've been in so many debates about, oh, is coffee good for you? Is coffee bad for you? And I was like, I don't care. I love coffee so much, I'm not going to give it up. Well, now I'm at the point where it's kind of fallen into the category of take it or leave it. I can
so let me
have the
follow
coffee.
a little bit of your journey, because maybe some people are listening to this for the first time. There was a conscious choice in you at some point when you said, well, I'm suffering from a certain amount of illness. There's discomfort in my body and I'm not happy about it, right? Who's happy when their body is in discomfort? So you made a choice to start informing yourself and looking for things that made sense to you. And so you educated yourself, which is really all that it is. And then I have had the similar experiences during fasting or whatever, when my body system starts communicating with me, and all those things we desire, from alcohol to sugar to tobacco, do naturally fall away. So this whole process that you're going through is really, really reestablishing the natural communication. And I see it on a metaphysical level also, Niels, because this is very, very much, it's very, we talk about union a lot in the metaphysical world, right? I know lots of metaphysicians, but so few actually put that whole union together within the body, with the microbes, with the signaling system. And so I just wanted to interject that there with you. Otherwise, if we're like in battle with addiction, whether it's sugar feeding a fungus in our body or whether it's tobacco or whatever, we've set ourselves up for a battle, right? And it doesn't really work out usually that well, and it takes a great deal of energy. That limited energy that your body's actually functioning with takes so much energy to fight an addiction. So it's beautiful to hear you say these things just floated away.
Yeah, and that's the old paradigm. Is it's based solely on war, on battling. We are in a fight against everything. Like life is a struggle. That's the old paradigm. And what I'm learning now through this experience is that it's not like that at all. I'm not battling anything right now. There's no fight. I don't have to fight. I can say perhaps with the psoriasis that it required a certain amount of persistence and tenaciousness. And what happened a little over a week ago was I had a little flare-up of psoriasis. If anyone's had psoriasis, what happens is you start treating it with whatever method, and it starts to diminish, and it looks like it's about to go away, and then suddenly, bam, it comes back with a vengeance, and it's like, I'm all itchy, and the psoriasis is back, and damn you, psoriasis. So the last time this happened, about a week ago, I just got out my Redox signaling gel, and I just kept applying it. Whenever I felt any itch, rather than scratching or picking at it, I was like, okay, just going to apply the gel, And I ended up one evening, I would say I applied the gel maybe 20 times to each spot that got itchy. So it was, and this is a gel that's recommended to use it twice per day. Mm-hmm. I used it 10 times that. I put it on 20 times and I said, screw it, I'm just going to keep putting this on because I was getting a little bit frustrated. Mm-hmm. Well, what happened that night, I woke up at 4 a.m, not feeling particularly well, went to the washroom, and there began 8 hours of intense purging. My body said, okay, you've indicated that you want to resolve some things. So my body said, that's it. We're not doing digestion right now. And it said, any food you've got, it's coming out as quickly as possible. It was coming out the back end. I was throwing up. I was getting full-on sweats. I was absolutely drenched with sweat. For about 8 hours this went on, and it was absolutely intense. I've never had a purge in my life, anything like that. But in the days that followed, I noticed my psoriasis is completely gone now. It's absolutely gone. So I sent a clear signal to my body that, I want to be done with this. Mm-hmm. I could tell there was a gentle, slow progress going on. I could tell it, okay, what I'm doing is working. But I was like, okay, it's pushing back. I want to push back on the pushback. And let's just resolve this thing. And the body said, okay, this is what it's going to take. And since then, my digestion is completely reset. I'm so comfortable now in my body. I've kind of switched now from carbohydrate burning to fat burning, mm-hmm. which is a whole new thing that, I'm sure people have heard of ketogenic diets because it's kind of the new thing that people are all trying out. And I hadn't really looked into it, but now I have. I actually just got Mercola's book, Fat for Fuel, 2 days ago. I've just finished it this morning. And what I noticed is that was the direction my body was leading me into. I was eating more healthy fats, like I went back to eating tons of avocados. Mm-hmm. Turns out, hey, that's the perfect fuel for your body. And so I was naturally being led down this new path of getting away from the carbohydrates, which are addictive.
Definitely.
And insulin is basically the hormone that's instrumental in that addiction. We always have elevated insulin levels, and they get higher and higher and higher, and we need more and more and more of it to and we need sugar to feed that addiction. And that whole vicious cycle, which is an entire lifetime, has now been broken, and I'm at total ease, and I don't want those carbohydrates at all. It's simple. Mind is clearer. Body is functioning better. Shed 15 pounds without doing anything. Like usually in the past, like I would go through cycles of being in shape and not being in shape. but it always relied on huge amounts of exercise. You know, I'd go, I'm kind of fat. I better do something. So, you know, this spring I'm going to ride my mountain bike every day, and I'm going to go up so many mountains. And sure, I would drop the weight and I'd be in super good shape for a while. This time, I don't do more than 10 minutes of working out per day. That's my absolute max. I won't work out for more than 10 minutes a day. And that's not even every day. Who's got time for that? I mean, come on. That's...
Yeah, well, what all the, you know, I've looked at all of this myself, and I've been in, I don't know, I don't like to call it alternative health, I'll just call it health, right? For most of my life, from being a midwife to studying homeopathy. And what you just described, this healing crisis, right? And I mean, you made a conscious choice. I'm pushing back against this. Okay, so I'm sick and tired of it, and I want it gone, right? But the one benefit of a psoriasis or anything that's on the skin level is that it's your body's major organ for releasing toxins. It's for releasing, you know, accumulated whatever. And so to have a purge is like something to be celebrated. And so unfortunately, as soon as somebody starts to feel ill, the first thing they want to do is suppress the symptom. And, you know, this is the biggest thing that homeopathy brought into, you know, the consciousness. And I've been using homeopathy most of my life. I rarely count on less than one hand how many times I've ever taken pharmaceutical for anything. So, I mean, I think that's also a part. I'm listening to you, Niels, and I'm not using the products you're using. I just recognize the experience you're having, right? I recognize the value of it. I recognize the ease of it. I recognize the rightness of it. So, you know, I know when I've studied redox signaling myself, and I've looked at all of these things, I think putting that just in our human consciousness, like really allowing people to understand how deeply programmed we've been about this body. And, you know, the one thing I wanted to ask you, actually, because, you know, we talk about the foods we eat, the cravings for natural, healthy foods, getting off carbs, sugars. I'm moving in that direction too. I made a conscious decision, and I'm not taking a product right now, that I'm not fighting. I just communed with my body. It's like, we don't need sugar anymore. Okay. We don't need these things anymore. Tobacco is one that, you know, I picked up a year ago when I went up to North Dakota. You know, indigenous with the Native Americans, it was just a sacred, tobacco is very sacred. But I ended up smoking again for a year and a half. So I moved to organic tobacco, but I think these things that we also have the ability to commune with our own body. Like we can set up in the body, not by fighting it, by recognizing it, by having this knowledge. And when we need help, we'll try to find the right thing that's helpful, whether it's Restore, Asea. I'd like to ask you about carbon 60, C60. You know, these are all the things that are on the forefront right now of human health. Cannabis oil. I mean, there's many, many things, and they're all sitting right there in the forefront. You know, and of course, we're going to get this is what I want to talk about, a pushback from the authority that doesn't want these things out there. And also, what I'm getting to with this long little thing of mine is that we're also in an environment that is toxic, much more toxic than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. We're not living in a natural environment anymore. I think you're fortunate, Niels, because I think you live in the country, right?
Yes, very rural.
Very rural. So, you know, for many people that might listen to this, they're either in a city or they might be in an apartment complex, or they might be surrounded by Wi-Fi and the coming in of the 5G networks and the cell phone networks. And, you know, I live surrounded by towers and big, huge electric lines. So I'm curious if there has been any correlation in the work studies that you've done, that when the body starts natural communion, if it has a natural defense towards these invasions.
Okay, here's a really interesting one. This is something that I learned recently. So the next essay in the series is going to be about molecular hydrogen.
Okay.
Now, hydrogen gas is something that in our ancient atmosphere, it existed. So when there was just microbes living on Earth, hydrogen was a natural part of the atmosphere. It no longer is. Hydrogen gas doesn't really occur in nature on Earth anymore, except for when it's produced during biological processes. So our ancestors, eating a natural diet that was high in fiber, the microbes that particularly live in our colons, they would digest the fiber. We don't use fiber ourselves. It doesn't really figure in our metabolism. But the microbes in our colon would digest the fiber, and in that digestion process, they would produce hydrogen gas, which is kind of the environment that they like. They want to have that as the atmosphere that they're in, because that's what they're used to, you know, historically or in the past, in the ancient past. But that hydrogen gas, that's the smallest molecule in the universe, and it's the most diffusive molecule in the universe. It will go everywhere. It goes through, if you have a jar of hydrogen gas in a glass jar, leave it for a few days, you'll have no hydrogen gas in your jar anymore. It just goes right through the glass. It just finds its way through any molecular structure. And hydrogen gas ends up having huge impacts on our physiology. And it's absolutely fascinating what it does in our body. Like I said, it's a fairly stable gas. It's non-polar, so it doesn't have a charge. It doesn't get pushed around by electric charges or anything. It just kind of diffuses wherever if it bumps into a molecule, then it's like a billiard ball and heads off in this direction. But it'll penetrate every cell in our body. It'll go right through every bacteria. It'll go everywhere throughout our system if we're producing it in our gut or somehow getting hydrogen gas into our bodies. And the fascinating part is that it will react with two things. There's only two things that'll cause that hydrogen H2 gas to split into two hydrogen ions and react. And the one thing that it reacts with is the hydroxyl radical, which is widely considered the most damaging free radical in our bodies. And that's just in the natural production in our mitochondria. They produce the hydroxyl radical as kind of an exhaust. It's one of the most radical of the oxygen species produced, and creates damage in the mitochondria and in the cell from the inside out. So when hydrogen gas comes into contact with this hydroxyl radical, it splits into two hydrogen ions, reacts with two hydroxyl radicals, and becomes H2O, or water, and ends up hydrating your cells, hydrating the mitochondria from the inside out. That's super elegant chemistry. Mm-hmm. And I said there was two things that it reacts with. The other thing is something I'd never ever heard of. It's called peroxynitrite. And for a month or two, I didn't hear anything more about peroxynitrite. I knew that it was another free radical, but had no idea what it does in our physiology or anything about its significance. And then the way the research works for me is I stumbled across this one paragraph in an article that I was just kind of skimming, and this word peroxynitrite jumped out at me, and I was reading an article on the effects of EMFs. So all this radiation that we're being exposed to, and it was that 80% of the damage that occurs on the cellular level, that's rupturing our cells and destroying cells in our body due to EMFs, the pathway is it's creating peroxynitrite in our body. That's the mechanism. Because to just say that certain electromagnetic frequencies are damaging to our cells doesn't really give us all the information. Well, what's the mechanism of damage? Like if you think about a microwave oven, how does that heat up food? Well, it vibrates at the frequency of water molecules and causes them to vibrate faster, which heats up the temperature. That's how that works. Well, the damaging EMFs that are causing so much havoc in our body resonate with peroxynitrite and causes our bodies to produce like 80% more peroxynitrite than is normal. And this is what's causing all the damage in the cells. Well, hydrogen gas, if it's there, it neutralizes all that peroxynitrite, and the mechanism of damage is eliminated. So hydrogen gas is taking out two of the most damaging things that we know about going on inside our own cells. And because we don't really eat enough fiber anymore, hardly any of us are getting any hydrogen gas.
So fiber, describe fiber, because we think of fiber like, I don't know, I think of flaxseed or, you know, what would be a good fiber to consume?
Probably the one that you would recognize the most would be celery, because when you chew on some celery, those strings.
It's fiber.
Yeah, exactly. That's the insoluble fiber. And that's the one that actually produces the most hydrogen gas, is the insoluble fiber.
Okay, but you have to have a healthy gut for that to happen, I would imagine.
Exactly, which is why a product like Restore, it's restoring that healthy gut. It's giving the communication system that tells all of the players in the microbiome, what does balance look like? Mm-hmm. I kind of understand how redox signaling works a little bit better. It's like a liquid circuit board, and redox signaling is about the flow of electrons, where the electrons go. And depending on the type of redox signaling molecules that are being produced by your microbiome, that determines where electrons will flow, which is essentially the flow of electricity between all of the players in our body. So by adding that liquid circuit board back into our systems, it allows the electrons to flow, and all of the players in our body, they add their own information. And on the molecular level, in the flow of electrons, there is so much information flowing through our systems that we can't even fathom it. But when you think about the internet, it's the same thing. It runs on electricity. It's, again, the flow of electrons. We use the exact same principle that nature uses to share all of our external information. It's the same system. So it's getting a little easier to understand.
Mm-hmm. Well, for a poetic mind or a mystical mind or metaphysical, whatever, when you say it flows like water, you know, I think that's bringing us closer to our natural being. We weren't meant to be static, shut down, agendicized, time, you know, we are actually water. I mean, you know, it's like water is life. I mean, this is not just a slogan, you know, so, and then to understand water, we understand physical matter, and then we do need to understand energy. Because any of us that have done our own investigations or read our, you know, our own research, because we're very curious, we're naturally curious, and that's one of the things I'm trying to help promote in other people. Aren't you curious anymore? You know, is that in the material world, which we are so locked into through our sight and everything else, we forget to see the flows of energy in our body. And all ancient, you know, healing has always had to do with energy flows, communication. Part of the body gets cut off from communication, it gets diseased. A part of the earth gets cut off, it gets diseased. So I think what you're saying, you know, whether or not anybody understands the scientific explanation for redox signaling, can understand that, or even begin to visualize in themselves, what does it feel like to flow? You know, to be a fluid nature, you know, and that brings in a whole bunch of structures in the outer we won't go into today because that's not the topic that we're on. But like you said, I mean, go back to what you first said, Niels, it's like naturally, without battle, without your body just reestablish its communion with all of life too, because it's not just the body, and you found yourself naturally moving in a more healthful direction. And
yeah,
it surprised you.
It's as simple as restoring the internal communication, and that just nudges us in the direction of a new way of behaving so that we have a new relationship with the external reality.
Mm-hmm.
So reestablish the internal communication, and we communicate differently than with the environment. Apart from our habits, it becomes a more healthful, because the communication within our own bodies is the source of our behavior now. It's not just what's going on in our heads. It's what's going on in our entire bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And it is on an energetic level. When you said that, you also mentioned earlier carbon 60.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is the most mysterious of the ones that I'm going to write about. But I recently listened to excellent talk between Dr. Zach Bush, the developer of Restore, and Dave Asprey, the CEO of Bulletproof, who's kind of on the ketogenic brain boosting side of things. Very intelligent man, excellent interviewer, but it was just such a super conversation. And they did bring up carbon 60. And Dr. Bush's take on carbon 60, I thought was so fascinating. But he's absolutely my favorite doctor in the world. His metaphysical view, his spiritual view, his knowledge in chemistry, it all links together, and it's such a beautiful, holistic view. But when he was asked about, well, what do you think's going on with carbon 60? He was like, well, it may have some antioxidant properties and blah, blah, blah. But his feeling on, I don't know if he said feeling, people don't necessarily like that word, but his concept of how carbon 60 works is that because of its unique structure, it's a sphere, and that's rather unique in nature. There's not very many molecules that are this tight, compact, very complex sphere that can penetrate pretty much anywhere. And he said, we're basically, when we're taking carbon 60, we're saturating our bodies with these little resonance chambers. He says he thinks that carbon 60 works on the energetic level. He says what he's working on is molecularly based, but underlying that is the energy base of everything, because that's the root of the root is energy. And carbon 60, he believes, is working on that energy level, that these are little resonance chambers in our bodies that allow the right frequency of energy to resonate everywhere in our body where these molecules accumulate. And I thought, that's just another wonderfully poetic. Right now, it's just a hypothesis. And that's the problem with carbon 60, is we have a whole lot of hypotheses out there and not a ton of research yet because it's so new. But so many people are reporting excellent results on carbon 60, and my dog loves it.
Okay. I'm going to put us on a pause. I have to take a few-minute break.
Sure.
And just before I do, I just want to say, when you were saying that about it being resonant, my whole body lit up. So that's where I take my knowledge from. But I'll be right back, Niels. It'll just take me a minute. Fascinating.
Sure.
It's fascinating.
And I've been fascinated at every step along the way, every little piece. Like, my intellect gets off on all of this intellectual digging into it and understanding exactly what the mechanism that's working here. But it's also very intuitively guided. And I'm just fascinated by the whole process. And here's something that I'd love to bring up. So I mentioned that I just read Dr. Mercola's Fat for Fuel book.
Mm-hmm.
And the one part of it that really turned me off was that Mercola is rather insistent that if you want to switch from burning carbs to burning fat as your primary fuel, you really should be measuring your blood glucose. You should get all these medical blood tests done first. You should be measuring your blood glucose several times a day. You should be getting a ketone body measurer to measure the ketone bodies, which is the fat burning portion, to see, so you can monitor this thing every step of the way and see how your changes in your diet will affect. And it was like, wow, what an intellectual approach to this whole thing, which stands in absolute stark contrast to my own experience, in that my body was just naturally leading me to these choices. And I did switch, other than the day of purging, I switched over from carbs to fuel, and it was just an effortless process. I didn't have to look at a chart of numbers and write in a journal 5 times a day what's going on. That idea just turned me right off, because that's using the intellect to make decisions. Well, I think I should do this. I think I should do that. Well, if those internal communication systems are working, you don't have to think about what you're going to do. You're just going to be naturally drawn to what's good for you. And that's been the effortless part of this journey. It's just so simple. It's so simple.
It's so beautiful, Niels, because I know that. I mean, you know, when you engage the intellect and the decision-making process, and that's what you're working from, you're exerting this extreme amount of energy and nitpicking, and you're missing most of the rest of it. I mean, that, and I've like I've already said, I've worked, you know, I've just done my own fascinating excursions into how our bodies function and what is true health. And I think that's great. I do want to go there. We don't want to make this too long today, but I want to go back to the hydrogen aspect of it, because this is new for me. I haven't heard this before. I am looking at carbon C60, and when you said it, the resonance, I mean, see, that's the thing, you know, and that ties in with the EMFs and everything else we're bombarded with, is that we're losing our natural resonance. We're losing our natural ability to communicate. And this is the purpose of all these things that they're implementing. But was hydrogen. So is this possible? I mean, can we get enough hydrogen in our system through diet, or is it so out of balance right now on the planet from bad farming habit practices and everything else that we need to take a supplement? Or how do you view that?
Okay, excellent question. I love it. I got a lot to answer on that one. First thing I want to say, though, is that there's a link between carbon 60 and hydrogen. That's something that came out in a recent interview that Sarah Westall originally did with Ken the scientist. He was explaining how when there was only microbes living on Earth, the earliest life, there was huge amounts of radiation on Earth. So the cosmic radiation that was bombarding this new life, the way that it protected itself is it gathered naturally occurring molecules of carbon 60 from the environment, which are kind of like sponges for hydrogen. So it has multiple bonding sites, covalent bonding sites on the carbon 60 molecule. So it can basically cover itself with a shell of hydrogen gas on the outside of the molecule, which then makes it impenetrable to that radiation. So early life was basically creating its own shield against cosmic radiation using carbon 60 plus hydrogen. And there was lots of hydrogen in that time to just, it would basically immediately be attracted to the carbon 60, so that it was kind of instrumental in the early formation of life. So that's something that now others have picked up on. There's been a couple Cliff High interviews since then, which he mentions that there's this relationship between carbon 60 and hydrogen, so you might want to implement the two in your life. So the question, how do we get hydrogen? And without a really healthy functioning microbiome in our guts like our ancestors used to have, and we're nowhere near that. We're so far away from that. I just have to stress that point, that we're nowhere near the microbiome that our ancestors had. Like, I'm talking thousands of years ago. So to get, I mean, our ancestors had enough for the situation that they were in, but they weren't in the situation of toxic environment, EMFs bombarding them. So our burden is even more. So even if we reestablished what our ancestors had in terms of the hydrogen being produced in their own guts, it's not likely that that would even be adequate for our hydrogen needs. So the way, okay, in Japan, that's where they're kind of leading the way with hydrogen research. And this is brand new. This is like maybe 2010 that this kind of got accepted in medical circles, and they're starting to do the studies on molecular hydrogen. So Japan, you can go into most hospitals and you can actually have a hydrogen therapy session where they'll just hook you up with a machine and put a cannula in your nose, and you'll just breathe a percentage of hydrogen gas, which I think is only about a 4% mixture because it's extremely combustible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that.
If we all remember the pictures of the Hindenburg, that was hydrogen gas. So it turns out, though, that breathing hydrogen gas isn't the most efficient way of getting it into our bodies. If we drink water that is hydrogen rich, so how do we get the hydrogen into the water? Well, water is hydrogen and oxygen, right?
Right.
Which, just to be poetic again, to me, hydrogen is the God particle. It's the true God particle, the number one thing on the periodic table. It's the first element. And you were talking about water is life. Well, the other element of water is oxygen, number 8, 1 octave higher. So it's the same as 1, but an octave higher. Hydrogen, oxygen. They come together, they form water. Now, we split those two apart, and of course, oxygen is absolutely essential to us breathing. That's what we're based on, is oxygen. And hydrogen, so most people, I think, that are supplementing with hydrogen at this point are using what are called little hydrogen tablets. So you drop this into your water bottle, screw the lid back on tight, and this little tablet produces a hydrolytic reaction within the water, so it splits it into oxygen and hydrogen, but it's using magnesium is the metal element that's causing this hydrolytic reaction. So the oxygen is actually reacting immediately with the magnesium, so it gets bound into a magnesium oxide, which kind of makes a little bit of a sediment in your water. But the hydrogen gas is free to bubble up through the water and basically dissolves into the water. And water can hold quite a bit of hydrogen. You can get up to about 10 parts per million. It's possible to get there, but it's not likely you're going to get anything quite that high. It's more in the 1.5 to 4 range would be therapeutic levels of hydrogen in your water. That's parts per million. And so I've been experimenting with the tablets. They have their drawbacks. I mean, you get the bottle of tablets. It costs $60 US for 60 tablets. So if you're using more than one a day, and you're supposed to use more than one a day, it's getting kind of pricey again. The other option is, and I've just ordered my own little machine that essentially just has 2 electrodes in the water, and one is bubbling off the oxygen, one's bubbling off the hydrogen on your 2 different, one's a cathode, one's an anode. I don't know what materials they use to differentiate between the two, but you're just doing an electrolysis in your water, adding electricity and using that to split instead of having a chemical reaction doing what the tablets do. You're just using electricity to split the water again. The good water bottles that do that, it vents the oxygen out, so that's just in exhaust, comes out, and the hydrogen is trapped in the water. So that's what I'll be trying next. But interestingly, alkaline water and alkaline water producing machines, that's another fad that came along recently, and lots of people were swearing by alkaline water. Oh, you got to get on alkaline water. But what was typically happening was people would have initial great results with their alkaline water machines, and then after a month or 2, the results would kind of diminish, and they would find that their health would start to go backwards again. And nobody could really understand, well, what the heck is going on here? Well, those alkaline water producing machines, it's not the alkalinity of the water that's going on and producing the health benefits. It's the fact that alkaline water does the same thing. It splits the water into hydrogen and oxygen.
Mm-hmm.
And on the hydrogen side, which is the alkaline side of the water being produced, it's hydrogen-rich water that you're drinking. But over time, using one of those machines, the electrode that's producing the hydrogen, because the oxygen isn't being vented out, it oxidizes that electrode and it produces less hydrogen.
Mm-hmm.
It will still produce alkaline water, so the alkalinity may be the same. You still may have a pH of 9.5 being produced in your alkaline water machine, but it's producing now less hydrogen gas. And it's the hydrogen gas that was providing the health benefits. And with that whole idea of alkaline water, even people who were selling the machines, they eventually came out and admitted that the science behind this is wonky. It doesn't make any sense, because they themselves knew that, yeah, okay, you've got an alkaline pH coming out of this machine at 9.5 or 10 even. Yet, if I take a half gallon of that water and I just squeeze a few drops of lemon juice in it, it plunges down to neutral.
Mm-hmm.
So when you drink that water, what's happening the instant it touches your stomach acid? It's not alkaline water anymore. So, and all it's doing is neutralizing your stomach acid. So that couldn't be the mechanism for the health benefits. So now that molecular hydrogen came on the scene, people are like, aha, that's what's going on here. Now, along the same lines, forgive me for blathering on for so long.
Go ahead. I
find this all so interesting. The other thing, maybe 15 years ago, I don't know if you knew about that little health craze called the Ionic foot bath.
No, yeah, I had one.
So do I.
No, I actually had one in the spa.
It became very popular in spas.
Yeah.
And again, people were getting good results from the Ionic foot bath. And it was touted primarily as a detox system, that you were pulling toxins out through your feet. Again, using electrolysis. You were splitting the water into hydrogen and oxygen, and the Ionic situation was supposedly drawing all the, and I actually do believe that there is a detoxification effect going on, but I think that that's secondary to the fact that your feet are sitting in hydrogen-rich water. And you're sitting there usually for what, about 40 minutes is the recommended time for an Ionic foot bath. And so if your feet are soaking in hydrogen-rich water for 40 minutes, those hydrogen molecules are definitely going into your feet. And as soon as it hits your bloodstream, they're being distributed all throughout your body. So again, it's the same mechanism working with the hydrogen gas.
That's fascinating because, and it's not, some people say, well, these things were a scam. Well, they really weren't a scam. They were, like you said, people were getting good results in the beginning using this. It's just that the science now has, I'm sorry, I'm having a cat moment. The science has developed more, right? The more finer mechanisms in our living system are seen. And I think it's fascinating. There's so much. I mean, really, Niels, we could probably talk for another 2 hours. Come on, Gata. She's clawed into my back here. We could go on and talk for hours. So just to recap, I mean, we've heard your experiences, the extraordinary results you're having. We've acknowledged that we're living in a toxic environment. I think the most fascinating thing I actually heard today, because there's so much going on out there about radiation and EMFs and the rollout of 5G and all of these things that those that are aware know are going on, is that we do have a natural, we had a natural from the very beginning protection system. So radiation, we don't have to be afraid of it if we start to understand the biological mechanism. And what you said about carbon C60 coating itself with these nitrogen hydrogen molecules, is absolutely fascinating. But just having knowledge for me, Niels, is so valuable. Whether I can actually go out and buy products or use them, or it starts me rearranging my own inner structure. And, I do hope that I have some experiments to do here with a couple of elderly people, and they've agreed to get on the carbon C60 restore. And would you say ASEA would be essential within that mix?
I wouldn't say that's essential. I think that restore is the most foundational of the things I've looked into so far.
Okay.
ASEA is, if you want to add to that, it builds on top of it beautifully, very synergistically, but it's not essential. And I'm saying that because ASEA is rather pricey.
Mm-hmm.
And to let you in on a little bit of a secret, the business side of the company is lacking.
Thank you so much, Niels, really. And I hope we can continue to have these discussions because I find them fascinating also. And when we upload this, let's put all the links that you talked about to the interviews you spoke about. And just, get people, it's like we have to engage with life, fullness of life, there's so much to know, I'm so astounded, when I'm tired of the conspiracy, whole side of the whole issue right now, because that just seems to go around in circles and circles. But when it comes to certain things like the MFs, the rollout of the geoengineering, I know right now I'm under duress because our skies here in Mexico have been sprayed night and day since November. We've had 2 days where they haven't sprayed. And I see the scalar patterns in the sky. I just got tired of it. I don't even take pictures of it anymore. Knowing that I'm under duress, though, is part of it, because then you say, okay, here. There's got to be a mechanism, okay, that we human beings have innately given to us that's going to get us through this time. And like you said, it's a transitory time.
I just want to add one more thing, that in my series of essays and talking about these things, I've been product focused. I just did that because I want people to have tools that work. If you had to build a house and you didn't have a hammer, you're going to have a hell of a time trying to push nails in with your fingers. It wouldn't work. We need tools to get through this transitional time. And I am in no way advocating that we need to be life dependent on these tools, that, for the rest of your life, you're going to have to be on Restore. For the rest of your life, you're going to have to be on ASEA. When we can get ourselves back to a natural state of health, and when we can begin to repair the environment around us, like if we can get back into eating natural foods, growing our own gardens, tending to soil and nurturing the life in the soil, if we can get back to doing that, we don't need those tools anymore. But for the transition that we're in right now, and this is a really, really tricky time because our health is being assaulted so incredibly. I just, when you originally talked about the impetus of what got me started, it wasn't just my own health challenges slowly building up, and now I'm in my 50s, so I'm starting to feel it. I was watching people around me and people that were younger than me, and they're having huge health problems and not finding any relief and don't know what to do, and they're scared. And I thought, okay, it's time to really look into this, dig into it. What's the root of what's going on, and what are the tools that are available? So that's where I'm coming from with what I'm doing here, not in any way trying to be a salesman. And I don't want people to become dependent on new things, like get rid of those supplements and bring in the new supplements. That's not what it's about. Reestablish the communication system, and we will naturally find the way forward where we can get off all of that technology. We don't need it. We can take it if we want it, leave it if we want it.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I'm coming from, and that's where I'd like to conclude.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I will just, take it way out on the woo-woo field to conclude it right here. And you and I know a lot of people in common, and we speak to the same people, but what you're talking about is a communion or a communication through a channel that's not seen. It's an energetic thing between the microbes of our natural bodies, with our earth, with everything. Even by you taking this experiment on, because why not experiment? If you can't experiment, right? I mean, you've done your research, do it. There's nothing wrong with that. But you're communicating now as a cell on a greater organism called the earth, right? Your experience is literally communicating with others, whether we make a video or not. But I really honor you, Niels, and I really thank you for this talk. And let's see how you are in a couple of weeks. And if I get I'm very, very, because I've watched, like you, younger, older people are suffering from lots of disease states. They don't know what to do. They've tried supplements, they've tried this, like you said, things work for a little while and then they stop working. So I'm going to start my experiment here. So thanks a lot, Niels, and we'll get together again real soon.
Look forward to it. Thank you, Christine.